Welcome back to the Ghastly Journal, your destination for the most shadowed and disturbing tales hidden from the light. Our journey today takes us into the mist-shrouded hills of post-Civil War Virginia, a place where grand estates, once gleaming symbols of prosperity, have become monuments to unspeakable atrocities. Rising from the rolling countryside like a specter of the antebellum South stands the Lancaster estate, known as Ravenwood Manor. Constructed originally in 1832, its sprawling verandas and grand white columns once played host to the very elite of Virginian society. The war had transformed much of the Commonwealth, yet through shrewd investments in the rebuilding efforts, the Lancasters managed to maintain their prominent position. There were whispers among the locals that their wealth grew in inverse proportion to the misfortunes of those around them. The arrival of spring in 1876 was marked by unusual warmth. The dogwoods, blooming early, scattered their white petals across the immaculate grounds of Ravenwood. Maintaining such grandeur required considerable manpower, 23 servants, to be precise. This number raised more than a few eyebrows among neighboring families who, struggling in the difficult economy following Reconstruction, had been forced to drastically reduce their own household staff. Colonel Thaddeus Lancaster, a man of 63 with a face weathered like cracked leather, had somehow avoided fighting in the war, citing a mysterious ailment that kept him confined to his estate during those bloody years. His wife, Eliza, some 30 years his junior, was seen moving through the halls of Ravenwood like a beautiful, cold porcelain figurine. Their children, Abigail and Jonathan, possessed the same ethereal pallor as their mother and were rarely seen venturing beyond the estate's iron gates. Situated at a respectful distance from the main house, the servants' quarters were neat, whitewashed buildings. From the outside, they appeared comfortable, certainly more so than the sharecropper shacks dotting the countryside. Yet, those who entered the Lancasters' service were rarely seen in town and never spoke of their employers. On the evening of May 15, smoke was seen rising from the direction of Ravenwood. By the time neighboring farmers arrived, the servants' quarters were fully engulfed in flames. The main house, its windows dark and shuttered against the night, stood completely untouched. Sheriff Thomas Blackwell arrived to discover a scene that would haunt him to his dying day. In the smoldering ruins, charred remains suggested the servants had been locked inside. But more disturbing discoveries awaited in the root cellar beneath the main kitchen, evidence of restraints, strange implements with no innocent purpose, and journals written in what appeared to be blood. The Lancasters had vanished, leaving behind only the whispers of their terrible secrets. 23 souls, men, women, and even children, had served them, and all 23 had perished under circumstances too grotesque for the local papers to detail. The subsequent investigation uncovered a pattern of disappearances connected to the Lancaster family, stretching back generations to their arrival in Virginia in the mid-18th century. Every 27 years, servants would vanish without explanation, only to be replaced by new, quiet faces who asked few questions. What dark ritual demanded such sacrifices? What evil resided behind the refined facade of Ravenwood Manor? The answers remain buried in decaying records from a time when the wealthy could ensure their secrets stayed hidden. In the wake of the Ravenwood tragedy, the citizens of Millbrook County found themselves caught between morbid fascination and sheer terror. Representatives from the neighboring township of Callaway came to examine the charred remains. Among them was Dr. Elijah Winters, whose clinical assessment of the bodies challenged the very foundations of medical understanding. The remains, he wrote in private correspondence, show evidence of systematic exsanguination, performed with surgical precision. The uniform pallor of the tissue is most curious, indicating complete drainage occurred while the victims were still alive. Even more disturbing is the apparent absence of any signs of struggle in many cases. Authorities seized the Lancaster estate records, revealing a meticulous log of servant acquisitions. Each individual was carefully selected from distant locations, immigrants with no family ties, orphans from northern institutions, and freedmen seeking opportunity in the uncertain landscape of Reconstruction. Their contracts contained clauses so Byzantine that Judge Monroe Hargrove declared them designed to conceal, rather than clarify, the true nature of the expected service. Beneath the manor's east wing, stonework from the original foundation revealed a chamber unknown to local builders. The architecture suggested alterations to colonial-era designs, with curious symbols carved into the lintels and thresholds. These markings matched woodcuts found in an uncatalogued volume in Thaddeus Lancaster's study, a treatise purportedly translated from texts predating the Roman Empire. Local parish records, consulted in hopes of tracing the Lancaster lineage, contained curious gaps. Though the family claimed heritage back to the earliest Virginia settlements, formal documentation of their presence only began in 1749 when Augustus Lancaster purchased the land where Ravenwood would eventually stand. Prior Lancaster generations seem to have materialized from thin air, their European origin suspiciously absent from immigration logs. In the weeks before the conflagration, neighboring farms noted atmospheric disturbances. Livestock refused to graze on pastures adjoining Ravenwood's boundaries. Birds abandoned their nesting sites in trees overlooking the estate. The spring air carried a metallic taint, a phenomenon attributed to unseasonable pollen until the manor's discovery suggested a more sinister origin. Personal effects salvaged from the servants' quarters told a story of gradual transformation. Journal entries from a scullery maid named Catherine Ellis chronicled increasing weakness and strange dreams. Her final entry, dated 3 days before the fire, described shadows moving behind their eyes when they watch us at supper, and how the young master's teeth seemed longer when he smiled. In Richmond society, whispered accounts circulated of strange gatherings at Ravenwood during the war years, when neighboring plantations stood abandoned or requisitioned. Travelers reported seeing lights moving through the surrounding forests on moonless nights and hearing chants in languages unknown to even the most educated linguists. Most disturbing were the family portraits in Ravenwood's Grand Gallery. Though spanning over a century, Eliza Lancaster bore an uncanny resemblance to her husband's grandmother, while Thaddeus himself possessed the same penetrating gaze as ancestors 4 generations removed, similarities too precise for mere heredity. 3 months into the investigation, the testimony of Obadiah Jenkins emerged. He was a traveling peddler who frequented the crossroads near Ravenwood. A man of considerable years with a spine curved like a question mark, Jenkins recounted a peculiar encounter with young Jonathan Lancaster on a rain-soaked afternoon in April. The boy stood at the property line, pale as moonlight on water, Jenkins testified. Not a drop of rain touched him despite the downpour. His fine garments bore not a single wrinkle or stain. When he spoke, his voice carried like church bells, though his lips barely moved. According to Jenkins, the young master inquired about bloodletting implements, claiming an interest in medical practices. The peddler reluctantly showed the boy his collection of scarificators and fleams. He handled them with a familiarity no child should possess, Jenkins continued, his weathered hands trembling. Then he asked if I could procure larger instruments suitable for, and I quote his exact words, more substantial vessels. This testimony corroborated findings in Colonel Lancaster's private correspondence with a Baltimore medical supplier, who had discreetly furnished the estate with equipment typically reserved for surgical theaters. Invoices detailed the delivery of specialized glass containers with silver siphoning mechanisms for collecting and preserving large quantities of blood. Further excavation of the estate grounds yielded more horrors. Behind the rose garden, where Eliza Lancaster often entertained afternoon callers, workers uncovered a mass grave containing remains dating back decades. The bodies, estimated at 37, showed similar signs of exsanguination, though these earlier victims had been disposed of rather than ceremonially burned. Professor Ambrose Thornfield from Miskatonic University, consulting on the strange markings, identified connections to ancient blood cults of the Carpathian region. In his monograph prepared for federal authorities, he suggested the Lancasters practiced rituals designed to extend life by consuming vitality from sacrificial subjects. The 27-year cycle corresponds to celestial alignments documented in pre-Christian European traditions, Thornfield wrote, alignments believed to thin the barriers between life and death. Most telling was the testimony of Millicent Carver, an elderly midwife who had attended Eliza Lancaster during both births. With rheumy eyes that had witnessed 86 winters, she recounted disturbing circumstances. Neither child cried at birth, she whispered to investigators, and the afterbirth was black as pitch and cold to the touch. When I placed the infants at their mother's breast, her milk ran crimson. The colonel ordered me from the room, but not before I saw. Her testimony then became incoherent, descending into prayers. The question that tormented investigators most was not what had happened at Ravenwood, but where the family had fled. Unconfirmed sightings emerged from New Orleans, Boston, and even London, each report describing a distinguished family with unnaturally youthful complexions despite their apparent age. In the summer of 1879, 3 years after the atrocities, a peculiar auction drew the attention of Virginia's remaining gentry. The state finally moved to liquidate the Lancaster estate. Harriet Montclair, a railroad magnate's widow, purchased a curious silver vanity set that had belonged to Eliza Lancaster. The mirror's frame featured intricately engraved vines that, upon closer inspection, revealed themselves as miniature human figures in various postures of agony. Within a fortnight, Harriet's lady's maid observed her mistress's hair thinning dramatically, her complexion taking on a grayish cast. The widow complained of nightmares where hands pulled her down into warm, thick liquid. By September, despite iron supplements, she was found deceased before her vanity, the silver mirror reflecting an expression of unspeakable terror. Similar fates befell other purchasers. Judge Carlton Hemingway acquired the Colonel's mahogany desk and was found slumped over it 6 weeks later, his body desiccated. The coroner noted that despite advanced dehydration, not a single drop of blood could be expressed from incisions made during examination. Most disturbing was the Pickering family, who purchased the entire Lancaster library. Their 10-year-old son Thomas developed an unnatural fascination with an unmarked tome in an unknown language. He began speaking in his sleep, reciting passages his horrified mother transcribed. By midwinter, Thomas had convinced 3 neighborhood children to participate in what he called the feeding game in an abandoned spring house. When discovered, Thomas sat cross-legged in a circle of unresponsive playmates, their wrists neatly sliced. On his deathbed in 1882, Alastair Pendleton, the auctioneer, confessed to withholding one item, a daguerreotype of the Lancaster family discovered behind a false panel. Their eyes followed my hands as I held it, he whispered to the attending priest. In the darkness of my closet, I would hear them breathing. The discovery of an ancient wooden chest in Ravenwood's sealed wine cellar in 1884 reignited investigations. Construction workers broke through an uncharted wall and found the cache Sheriff Blackwell had missed. Among the items was a leather-bound journal belonging to Thaddeus Lancaster's father, Silas. The pages revealed the terrible inheritance passed through the bloodline. May 7, 1837, one entry read: "The hunger grows more insistent. Elixirs provide temporary relief, but without fresh essence, the deterioration accelerates. The slave quarters provide sustenance that raises minimal concern when they occasionally disappear." More disturbing were records detailing a breeding program among selected servants, with clinical observations about bloodlines that produce superior yield. Accompanying the journals was correspondence with a certain Baroness Karolf of Romania, dated 1858, outlining a ritual requiring simultaneous sacrifice during celestial convergence. The synchronized release of life essence from 23 vessels as the Earth's shadow touches the blood moon will sustain not merely the body but transfer qualities of youth that mere feeding cannot provide. Dr. Josephine Wardwell, one of the first female pathologists in Virginia, examined bone fragments from beneath the manor. Her findings documented evidence of controlled exsanguination over generations, with subtle refinements in technique. The precision of incisions evolved from crude methods to sophisticated surgical approaches, developing techniques for extending the extraction process, keeping subjects alive far longer than medically possible during complete blood drainage. Perhaps most haunting was a child's diary belonging to a servant girl identified only as M, found wedged between nursery floorboards. Her final entry read, "Miss Abigail asked me to play a special game tonight when the moon goes dark. She showed me her special teeth and promised it only hurts at first. The bell is ringing now." In autumn 1887, Professor Emmeline Devereux arrived from the Sorbonne. A formidable scholar of occult anthropology, she moved through Ravenwood's ruins with practiced detachment. "The architecture itself participates in the ritual," she observed, measuring curious angles. "These are functional elements, not aesthetic choices. Note how the main hall creates perfect alignment with both the servants' quarters and the North Star during the equinox." Working through the recovered library, Professor Devereux identified references to an ancient text called the Vitae Mortis. "The Lancaster variation appears uniquely American," she wrote. While European practitioners selected victims individually, the plantation system provided ideal conditions for industrializing the process. Their meticulous record-keeping reveals how thoroughly the family conflated human cultivation with other forms of harvesting. Her most significant contribution came from soil analysis of the rose garden, revealing traces of a powerful sedative derived from rare Caribbean fungi. This explained the servants' lack of resistance. They had been systematically drugged through their food. Most disturbing was her discovery beneath Eliza Lancaster's sitting room floorboard, a delicate silver thimble-sized cup on an ivory stand with microscopic channels, a tasting apparatus for sampling quality without consuming quantity. When questioned about the Lancasters' ultimate fate, Professor Devereux offered only a cryptic response: "Entities that sustain themselves as they did seldom truly perish. they migrate like birds seeking favorable conditions. I would direct your attention to reports from Colorado's mining communities, where 23 workers at the Silver Crest mine have disappeared since May. The winter of 1893 brought unprecedented snowfall. As wind swept across Ravenwood's abandoned grounds, the property finally found a new owner in Augustus Thorne, a textile magnate from Manchester who purchased its sight unseen. Among his peculiar requests was preserving a collection of daguerreotypes discovered beneath the nursery floorboards, depicting the servants who had perished in the fire. The progression across these portraits showed each subject's countenance transforming from robust health to hollow-eyed resignation. Virginia Commonwealth University conducted limited excavations beneath the manor's root cellar in 1894, uncovering evidence of much older structures. Carbon dating suggested pre-colonial occupation. The site appears to have hosted ritualistic activities long before European settlement, concluded Professor Bartholomew Winters. The Lancaster family recognized and exploited its inherent properties. Shipping records from Baltimore detailed unusual cargo delivered to Ravenwood between 1841 and 1875, specialized glassware from Bohemia, refined silver instruments from Switzerland, and most curiously, casks of soil from the Carpathian Mountains described as agricultural specimens. The spring of 1900 brought an unexpected visitor to Ravenwood's weathered gates. Elijah Samuels, grandson of Martha Samuels, a cook who had reportedly departed for Baltimore in 1872, arrived bearing letters casting new shadows. Martha had not secured alternative employment. She had fled after witnessing a communion most unholy between the Lancaster family and something in the estate's north woods. "What remains engraved upon my memory," she wrote to her sister, "is not merely the act itself, but the transformation I witnessed afterward. Their skin flushed with vibrant color stolen from those made to kneel before them. Most terrible was their movement from halting age gestures to liquid grace by midnight." The letters, penned from a Philadelphia boarding house where Martha hid under an assumed name, described her gradual deterioration. Professor Devereux, summoned from retirement, identified distinctive marks pressed into the paper, deliberate sigils. The Lancasters had developed mechanisms for remote extraction. Archaeological investigation of Martha's final resting place in Philadelphia's Potter's Field revealed her remains displayed no signs of decomposition after 28 years interred. The tissues were suffused with a crystalline substance similar to preservatives used in the Lancasters' collection vessels. She had been prepared, not merely fed upon, but conditioned into a renewable resource. Most chilling was a ledger tracking lunar cycles through 1903, with a single date circled in human blood, precisely 27 years after the Ravenwood fire. Across the margin, in handwriting matching Thaddeus Lancaster's, "Colorado insufficient. Virginia soil calls us home." Through the bitter cold of December 1903, precisely 27 years after the tragedy, an unseasonable fog descended upon Millbrook County. The mist clung to hollows with unnatural persistence, seeming to absorb sound. Farmers reported livestock refusing water, wells developing a faint metallic taste. Augustus Thorne abruptly dismissed all workers with generous severance, claiming an extended European sojourn. But a railway porter reported peculiar luggage delivered to the estate, 8 long cedar crates, each approximately coffin-sized, arriving by private train from the west. A silver-haired gentleman registered at the Millbrook Hotel as Professor Artemus Ward from Johns Hopkins University. His credentials dissolved into fiction upon inquiry. Before authorities could question him, he vanished, leaving behind a detailed map of Millbrook County with 23 residences marked in red ink, each home to descendants of families who had witnessed the original investigation. The town physician recorded an unprecedented 17 cases of severe anemia among these same families between January and March of 1904. Victims reported no physical trauma, merely increasing weakness and disturbing dreams of being sipped like tea by elegantly dressed strangers. Most disquieting was a sealed letter delivered to Professor Devereux at her coastal villa, bearing a Millbrook postmark though she had shared her location with no one. The envelope contained only a pressed dogwood blossom and a calling card engraved with 3 words, "Hunger transcends death." The spring of 1915 brought unusual activity to the abandoned Whitaker property adjoining Ravenwood's eastern boundary. A team from the newly formed Bureau of Paranormal Investigations arrived with bewildering equipment, glass tubes capturing atmospheric samples, photographic plates sensitive to wavelengths beyond normal vision. Leading this expedition was Dr. Josephine Caldwell, whose younger sister had perished in the Ravenwood conflagration. For 3 decades, she had studied predatory supernatural phenomena. The boundary between Ravenwood and adjacent properties is not merely legal but metaphysical, she noted. Soil samples reveal a gradient of contamination extending precisely 17 yards from the property line. Most remarkable were phonographic recordings captured during the waning gibbous moon. When played at half speed, they revealed rhythmic pulsations matching heart rates gradually slowing toward cessation. Excavation beneath the Whitaker Springhouse yielded a tunnel extending toward Ravenwood, its walls reinforced with estate timber. Niches at regular intervals held small clay vessels containing residue of human blood mixed with compounds delaying coagulation, a feeding circuit, Dr. Caldwell concluded, allowing resources to flow from surrounding properties toward the central house. Most disturbing was testimony from Eliza Whitaker, aged 97, who recalled childhood stories about arrangements between certain families and the Lancasters. In exchange for protection during economic hardships, these households permitted small, regular contributions to what was euphemistically called household medicine. Among Dr. Caldwell's personal effects discovered after her disappearance was a daguerreotype showing the Lancaster family in 1875. In the shadowy periphery stood a figure bearing an uncanny resemblance to Augustus Thorne. The winter of 1926 brought an unexpected discovery to the Millbrook County Historical Society. Archivist Winifred Pembroke uncovered a leather portfolio hidden within a false bottom of an ornate writing desk. Bound in material uncomfortably resembling human skin, it contained daguerreotypes and physicians' notes documenting the systematic transformation of the Lancaster family over 3 generations. The earliest images showed Silas Lancaster in 1837, deeply lined, eyes sunken. Subsequent images at 3-month intervals revealed gradual reversal of aging. Each significant improvement corresponded precisely with disappearances from neighboring properties. Accompanying these were meticulous medical observations by Dr. Matthias Blackwood, the family physician whose true role was monitoring feeding efficacy. Subject TL shows marked improvement following administration of essence from female source, age approximately 16, read 1 entry. Cellular renovation progresses most rapidly when subject receives vitality from sources not yet fully mature. Detailed sketches showed specialized equipment evolving from crude mechanisms to sophisticated devices capable of extracting energies across considerable distances. By retaining a physical token from each vessel, hair, fingernails, or ideally a tooth, the family maintains energetic conduits permitting supplementary feeding between major harvests. Professor Catherine Marlowe of Miskatonic University identified the methodology as consistent with forbidden practices documented in the Feeding Rituals of the Ancient Blood Cults manuscript. The Lancaster variation shows remarkable innovation. This Americanized approach industrialized the process, creating human cattle operations sustaining multiple feeders simultaneously while maintaining social respectability. The final page contained a family tree drawn in faded brown ink, actually human hemoglobin, showing not traditional lineage but feeding relationships. Most chilling was the notation beside Augustus Thorne's name, the circle completes. The disappearance of Dr. Josephine Caldwell prompted dispatch of her colleague Dr. Marcus Whittier to Millbrook County in autumn 1927. A man of meticulous habits, Whittier brought devices sensitive to etheric disruptions. "The soil speaks volumes about what it has absorbed," he wrote. At Ravenwood, the earth itself has become saturated with a miasma defying conventional scientific categorization. His centerpiece apparatus, resembling a gramophone merged with a medical sphygmomanometer, oscillated wildly when activated near property boundaries, emitting a droning hum that caused nearby birds to drop from the sky. Most peculiar were crystalline formations in the abandoned root cellar, delicate structures resembling frost patterns but persisting despite ambient temperature. Under microscopic examination, they revealed cellular structures identical to human blood dried at varying extraction stages. The architectural geometry of Ravenwood functions as a massive containment vessel, Whittier hypothesized. The local postmistress shared a disturbing pattern. Letters addressed to descendants of former Ravenwood servants arrived regularly on the second Tuesday of each month, each bearing different postmarks. Recipients invariably took to their beds, complaining of exhaustion and night terrors featuring elegantly dressed figures watching them. The investigation took its darkest turn when Whittier discovered a leather-bound volume in cipher beneath the Lancaster dining room floorboards. After 3 sleepless weeks of analysis, he decoded portions detailing the summoning of scattered essence, a means of reclaiming vitality from past victims regardless of distance or death. Whittier's final journal entries described sounds emanating from within sealed manor walls, resembling human circulation, growing steadily louder as though the house itself were developing a heartbeat. The morning fog clung to Millbrook County like a burial shroud in November 1938. County Archivist Marion Wexley discovered photograph cylinders labeled with dates corresponding to the lunar cycle. The recordings contained only static, yet each playing left her lightheaded with a metallic taste. After the third cylinder, she noticed faint blue veins newly visible beneath her increasingly pallid skin. The medium itself carries the contagion, she wrote in her private journal. Something within the wax compound resonates with human tissue. I feel myself growing thinner, as though something vital seeps away even as I catalogue these dreadful artifacts. From her window, Marianne could glimpse Ravenwood's northernmost chimney. During lengthening evenings, she observed a thin wisp of smoke rising from that distant stack, though the property stood officially abandoned. The archive room temperature dropped precipitously each sunset, frost forming in intricate patterns resembling circulatory systems across the windows. Most disquieting were dreams of elegant figures in antiquated formal wear standing in her bed chamber, their pale faces dominated by eyes that seemed to drink the sight of her supine form with terrible thirst. Each morning she woke feeling diminished. I understand now why investigation documents remain incomplete, she confided to her locked journal. Those who begin to comprehend the Lancaster method become unwittingly ensnared. Knowledge itself creates the connection they require. In the margin of this final entry, a different hand had added a line in ink matching Lancaster correspondence: "Your understanding makes you exquisite." The summer of 1940 cast merciless heat across Millbrook County, desiccating Ravenwood's once lush gardens into twisted mockeries. Wells throughout the region ran dry, save those on properties once connected to Lancaster Holdings, which yielded water with disturbing metallic sweetness that livestock refused but children craved. Archives documented an unusual demographic pattern. Residents born within 17 miles of Ravenwood exhibited markedly accelerated aging. Dr. Edwin Mercer recorded 37-year-old farmhands with arthritis typical of men twice their age, while children conceived near the property often entered the world with unnaturally translucent skin and fully developed adult-like teeth. Most compelling was the testimony of Harriet Willoughby, court administrator for the perpetually unresolved Lancaster estate. During inspection, she discovered beneath the library's parquet floor a subterranean chamber lined with polished obsidian containing a hovering sphere of darkness absorbing rather than reflecting light. Upon approaching, she experienced distinct diminishment, as though years were siphoned away. Her hair, showing but few silver strands that morning, had transformed to uniform gray by the time she staggered from that unholy chamber. The sphere, examined by bureau specialists wearing silver mesh protective gear, contained concentrated essence from hundreds of sources. Spectroscopic analysis detected subtle wavelength emissions matching those recorded from Lancaster family portraits, suggesting a symbiotic relationship. The paintings functioned as anchors, tethering the family's consciousness to our physical plane while their corporeal forms underwent restoration. Most disturbing was the pattern of birth deformities in livestock born on adjacent properties, creatures with too many eyes, misplaced joints, and in one case, a foal whose translucent skin revealed circulatory structures more reminiscent of human vasculature. The Lancaster hunger had evolved into persistent environmental contamination, continuing to harvest vitality even in their apparent absence. The autumn of 1943 arrived with unseasonable warmth, causing ancient oaks surrounding Ravenwood to retain their leaves beyond natural cycles. These unnatural crimson canopies cast the estate in perpetual sunset glow, the filtered light staining weathered columns the color of old blood. No birds nested, no squirrels gathered acorns, no insects burrowed beneath the bark. Professor Abigail Montgomery of Virginia Commonwealth's newly established parapsychology department arrived with equipment utilizing Tesla's principles and Edison's sound advances. The manner exists simultaneously in multiple states of temporal progression, she wrote. While the structure appears abandoned, instruments detect patterns of habitation occurring parallel to our experienced reality. Montgomery observed that previous investigators shared physiological markers regardless of relation, subtle blood composition alterations, diminished bioelectrical signatures, and microscopic crystalline structures embedded within optic nerves functioning as receivers for stimuli invisible to unaffected individuals. The harvest moon brought atmospheric conditions sending Montgomery's instruments into violent oscillation. Barometric pressure plummeted while temperatures within the manor's stone walls dropped to levels transforming ambient moisture into frost patterns resembling human circulatory systems. From sealed master bedroom windows came faint amber illumination throbbing with human heartbeat rhythm. Local physician Dr. Catherine Blackwell, descendant of the family whose name had become inextricably linked with the Lancaster legacy, documented an epidemic of progressive anemia affecting precisely 23 residents. Each victim reported identical nightmares of elegant figures gathering around their beds, silver instruments extended toward exposed throats. The Montgomery expedition's final recordings captured sounds no human vocal apparatus could produce, resonant frequencies deforming the wax cylinders themselves. Linguists later identified elements of ancient Romanian dialects interwoven with something older, arranged in patterns neurologists noted could induce trance states. The silence descending upon Millbrook County in autumn 1916 bore unnatural density, a stillness not of peace but of anticipation. Precisely 40 years after the original conflagration, skies above Ravenwood Manor bruised purple with clouds refusing rain yet rumbling with constant thunder. Dr. Eleanor Blackwell stood alone upon the hilltop overlooking the estate, 3 generations of her family's atonement embodied in silver instruments arranged in a precise octogram around her feet. Her grandmother's journals, her father's research, her own decades of study, all converging on this moment when barriers between worlds grew thinnest. They feed not merely on blood but on attention itself, she whispered. Knowledge of them sustains them. Fear strengthens them. Curiosity draws us into their web. The manor's windows blazed suddenly with amber illumination, though no mortal hand had lit those lamps in decades. Silhouettes moved behind glass that should have shattered from neglect, elegant figures raising crystal goblets in silent toast. Eleanor removed from her medical bag 23 vials, each containing blood freely given by descendants of those who had perished in the original fire. With methodical precision, she arranged these offerings according to patterns decoded from the cipher she had spent 7 years cracking. What the Lancasters failed to comprehend, she continued, her voice steady despite the wind clawing at her clothing, is that consumption creates connection in both directions. The ground trembled as something ancient stirred beneath Ravenwood's foundations. The crystals embedded throughout the estate's architecture began resonating with harmonics setting Eleanor's teeth on edge. They had never been remnants, they were receivers, painstakingly positioned over generations to amplify and channel extracted vitality. From her waistcoat, she withdrew the final component, a daguerreotype showing the Lancaster family in their prime, stolen from sealed bureau archives. The image had altered since its creation, the subject's expressions gradually transforming from aristocratic reserve to naked hunger. Your fundamental error, Eleanor addressed the photograph as amber light intensified, silhouettes pressing against windows with desperate urgency, was believing that only the living could be harvested. With surgical precision, she drew a silver scalpel across her palm, allowing 7 drops of Blackwell blood, containing traces of every investigator who had ever pursued the mystery, to fall upon the photograph. The crimson droplets sank into it as though the paper had become suddenly porous. A sound beyond description erupted from within Ravenwood Manor, not merely a scream but the accumulated anguish of every soul drained across centuries of consumption. The amber light flickered violently before inverting to cold blue radiance pouring from windows like liquid. The silhouettes within twisted in impossible contortions as the channel Eleanor had established began drawing their accumulated essence back through generations of harvesting. The debt, Eleanor whispered as the manor's timbers groaned with sudden structural distress, must finally be balanced. The investigation files regarding Ravenwood Manor remained sealed in bureau archives for 50 years following Eleanor Blackwell's final confrontation. When scholars gained access in 1966, they discovered a curious phenomenon. Photographs showed progressive deterioration accelerated far beyond natural weathering. Wooden beams had collapsed inward like desiccated corpses. Stone foundations cracked along precise geometric patterns no geological process could explain. The surrounding forest reclaimed the grounds with unnatural vigor. Botanical surveys documented species unknown to Virginia's ecosystem, nightshade variants with translucent berries containing microscopic circulatory systems, fungi whose spores produced minute quantities of human hemoglobin. Most striking were the roses colonizing what had been the formal garden, their blooms so arterial crimson they appeared to pulse in peripheral vision. Children born in Millbrook County during the 3 decades following Eleanor's ritual displayed curious uniformity of excellent health, with medical records showing not a single anemia case. The Blackwell bloodline, however, paid a terrible price. Eleanor's own body was discovered 7 days after the confrontation, not at Ravenwood but in her modest bedroom 17 miles distant. Medical examiners found no cause for the advanced aging transforming a woman of 37 into a withered crone seemingly centuries old. Her final journal entry, written in deteriorating handwriting, read, "The channel, once established, requires an anchor in both realms. My descendants must maintain vigilance. Subsequent Blackwell generations manifested distinctive characteristics: hair prematurely silver from adolescence, eyes with heterochromic sectors shifting color under certain lighting, and blood-resisting standard testing procedures, samples inexplicably desiccating within minutes. The township of Millbrook gradually diminished as younger generations moved away, leaving primarily descendants of families connected to the original tragedy. These remaining inhabitants developed inexplicable traditions, leaving small silver bowls of fresh water on doorsteps during full moons, planting rowan and ash in precise formations, maintaining absolute silence for 23 minutes at dusk on the conflagration anniversary. When the Bureau of Paranormal Investigations was formally dissolved in 1972, their final assessment of Ravenwood simply stated, "Contained but not concluded." The debt continues its collection through established channels. The Lancaster lineage did not truly begin in Virginia, nor even in the Old World as conventional records suggested. Their peculiar appetites traced back to ancient Carpathia, where mountains cradle secrets older than written language. Correspondence between Thaddeus Lancaster and a Romanian historian named Vasile Dulca, dated 1858, illuminated this connection. "The practice you have refined," wrote Dulca, "represents merely an industrialized adaptation of rituals our mountain villages have feared since before Christ walked in Jerusalem. The consumption was never meant for personal longevity, but rather as sacrifice to entities existing in threshold spaces between worlds. Your family's error lies in believing yourselves masters rather than intermediaries." This warning went unheeded. The Lancasters had not invented their methods but merely adapted Old World parasitism to New World efficiency. Their innovation lay not in the practice itself but in the scale and systematic approach, the adaptation of plantation management principles to cultivating and harvesting human essence. What they failed to comprehend, what Eleanor Blackwell ultimately weaponized against them, was that consumption creates symmetrical bonds. Their fatal miscalculation was assuming quantity alone determined strength. They discounted the cumulative power of collective suffering, the pooled consciousness of generations of vessels whose essence they had treated as mere commodity. The architectural peculiarities of Ravenwood served functions beyond mere collection. Each precise angle and measured shadow created what occultists term sympathetic geometries, patterns that, when properly aligned with celestial positions recurring every 27 years, temporarily thinned the membranes separating conventional reality from those threshold spaces Dulca referenced. Most revealing were birth records from the family Bible, showing no Lancaster child had ever been born during daylight hours. All entered the world between midnight and 3 ante-Meri DM, what medieval scholars called the dead hours. The Lancasters were not merely practitioners of parasitic consumption but had evolved physiological dependency, their very existence contingent upon regular extraction of external vitality. What remains incompletely understood is why they required precisely 23 vessels. In esoteric traditions, 23 represents the threshold number, neither fully part of our material world nor completely transcended. The Lancasters existed perpetually at this liminal point, suspended in a transitional state requiring constant energetic maintenance. The winter of 1976 arrived with unexpected gentleness upon the rolling hills of Virginia. A century after the original conflagration, snow fell in delicate crystalline patterns across Ravenwood's ruins, covering decay with deceptive beauty. Academic interest had waned to occasional footnotes. Yet patterns persisted, visible only to those knowing precisely where to focus. Every 27 years since Eleanor Blackwell's intervention, subtle atmospheric disturbances manifested above the former estate, barometric anomalies, electromagnetic fluctuations, peculiar light phenomena defying conventional explanation. Catherine Blackwell, great-granddaughter of Eleanor, alone maintained the vigil her bloodline demanded. Her silver hair framed a face youthful despite her 43 years, though her eyes carried the unmistakable burden of inherited responsibility. As the centennial approached, she meticulously monitored indicators her ancestors had documented. "The symmetry approaches completion," she wrote in her leather-bound journal. "What began as debt collection has evolved toward equilibrium. The channels established by my great-grandmother have gradually reversed the flow, distributing what was hoarded across generations." Medical examinations conducted discreetly through her university position showed descendants of original Lancaster servants displaying cellular regeneration patterns exceeding normal human capacity, not immortality but gradual restoration of what their ancestors had lost. Conversely, those with even distant Lancaster lineage exhibited accelerated aging and immunological fragility. What remained unresolved was the final destination of the Lancaster consciousness itself. Eleanor's journal suggested not destruction but containment, perpetual hunger without satisfaction, awareness without agency. In the snow-covered ruins on the centennial night, Catherine completed the ritual her bloodline had maintained for 4 generations. 23 candles of rendered beeswax mixed with silver dust formed a precise geometric pattern among collapsed timbers. As the winter moon rose, she unfurled ancient maps showing ley line intersections beneath the property. "The cycle completes not in retribution but in restoration," she whispered. "What was taken returns, what was broken mends. The debt reaches final settlement." The ephemera collected by Virginia Commonwealth University Special Collections in 2003 included a curious overlooked item, a leather-bound medical ledger belonging to Dr. Matthias Blackwood, discovered during renovation of his former Richmond residence. The brittle pages contained observations never meant for academic scrutiny. "The Lancaster methodology," Blackwood wrote in flowing script dated September 1874, "represents not mere predation but symbiosis of the most elegant design. Their innovation lies in maintaining vessels in perpetual harvest state, neither fully drained nor completely vital. They do not feed for longevity alone but for continued existence in our material plane." Most revealing was Blackwood's detailed analysis of the crystalline structures throughout Ravenwood's architecture, not residue as previously theorized but purposeful conduits forming a circulatory system writ large across physical space, with the manor itself functioning as a massive organ for processing consumed vitality. "The 23 vessels represent the alchemical principle of transformation," Blackwood explained. 20 representing the completed material world, 3 signifying catalytic spirit, together forming the threshold number enabling transmutation of life essence. Archaeological ground-penetrating radar surveys in 1997 revealed what generations had missed. Beneath Ravenwood lay concentric rings of tunnel systems extending far beyond property boundaries, creating geometric patterns matching no known architectural tradition, aligned precisely with celestial positions during the 27-year convergence, a massive resonance amplifier. Most disturbing were Blackwood's clinical observations regarding the Lancaster children. The infants require immediate transfusion upon birth. Without external supplementation, cellular deterioration begins within minutes, not decomposition but dissolution, as though their physical form lacks fundamental cohesion. They are not merely practitioners but products of the consumption. The final pages suggested a horrifying possibility. "I begin to suspect we fundamentally misunderstand the Lancaster identity across generations. The consistency suggests not hereditary transmission but continuation, the same consciousness inhabiting successive physical vessels. The family name persists not through conventional lineage but through essence transference." This revelation contextualized the disturbing similarity in Lancaster portraits across centuries, not family resemblance but the same beings gazing through different eyes. The children of Millbrook whisper stories they cannot possibly know, tales passed through blood rather than word. On certain nights, they awaken simultaneously from dreams of elegant figures with too many teeth. Their parents find them sitting upright in darkened bedrooms, small fingers tracing patterns matching precisely the architectural geometries of a mansion none have ever visited. The land where Ravenwood once stood remains conspicuously barren despite numerous cultivation attempts. Agricultural scientists documented soil containing molecular structures they compared to crystallized memory, organic compounds arranged in patterns mimicking neural networks. Seeds planted in this earth germinate into twisted approximations, roses whose petals possess delicate striations of human vasculature, corn whose kernels arrange themselves in patterns matching the Lancaster family crest. The Blackwell descendants carry their burden with dignity. Their silver hair arrives with adolescence. Their heterochromic eyes shift like mood rings with circadian precision. Medical examinations reveal blood remaining stubbornly vital for weeks without preservation yet impossible to transfuse into others without immediate rejection. They are human reservoirs, their very cells containing what Eleanor reclaimed. Parish records document a curious demographic anomaly across 7 counties surrounding the former estate. Residents consistently outlive actuarial predictions by precisely 23%, their vitality extending into unusually robust final decades. Death arrives not through gradual deterioration but peaceful cessation, as though a designated allotment of vitality had been equitably distributed and finally naturally depleted. Museum curators handling Lancaster artifacts wear silver-lined gloves after 3 incidents of temporary paralysis affected staff who touched these items with bare skin. Even properly protected, they report sensations of unnatural coldness emanating from seemingly ordinary objects, a sensation one conservator described as the opposite of warmth, not merely its absence but its negation. The Lancaster bloodline did not truly end but rather dissipated, diluted across generations of strategic marriages into unsuspecting families. Descendants display subtle markers visible only to those knowing precisely what to observe, distinctive pallor, no amount of sun effects, incisors slightly more pronounced, and instinctive aversion to silver manifesting as contact dermatitis. What the Lancasters began through conscious malevolence continues through biological momentum. Their legacy persists not in monuments or achievements but in subtle alterations to the natural world they touched, changes too profound to reverse, too insidious to fully comprehend, too fundamentally integrated to ever truly end. In 2023, an elderly groundskeeper discovered a peculiar silver box while clearing undergrowth from Ravenwood's eastern boundary. The container, no larger than a prayer book yet impossibly heavy, bore the Lancaster crest interwoven with symbols causing digital photographs to blur inexplicably. Within lay a confessional letter penned by Jonathan Lancaster himself, dated May 14, 1876, the day before the conflagration. The parchment, preserved in unnatural perfection, revealed the terminal revelation contextualizing all that came before. The careful calligraphy, rendered in ink containing human hemoglobin, confessed not to consumption but to invasion. We were never the hunters, the child's hand had written with impossible eloquence. We ourselves were vessels first, hosts to entities that arrived with our ancestors fleeing the Carpathian purges. What flowed through our veins was never truly Lancaster blood but the essence of beings ancient beyond human reckoning. We were their chalices, their physical embodiment. The hunger was never ours, we merely provided the mouths through which they fed. Linguistic specialists identified patterns in the text suggesting multiple consciousnesses expressing through a single hand, voices of varying ages and origins emerging in subtle shifts of pressure and flourish. The entities that wore the Lancaster family-like garments had themselves been multiple, a collective sustaining itself through Ravenwood's elaborate feeding mechanism. Most profound was Jonathan's description of the entity's true form glimpsed during moments when their control momentarily wavered. They exist as patterns rather than substance. Geometric arrangements of pure consumption that require physical hosts to interact with our world. Without us, they would remain formless hunger, eternal and unsated. The letter concluded, tomorrow night, they believe they will complete the 27-year convergence granting them fuller manifestation. They have prepared 23 vessels for simultaneous consumption, unaware that I have altered the ritual alignments within the manor's architecture. The hunger that has worn my family like clothing for generations will find itself trapped between realities when the pattern fails. We shall burn together, though I alone burn willingly. This final revelation explains the peculiar atmospheric phenomena persisting at 27-year intervals, not attempts at return but momentary thinning of barriers continuing to imprison entities caught in Jonathan's sacrificial disruption. The Blackwell bloodline maintains not merely a vigil but a living seal, their altered physiology functioning as biological barrier against forces perpetually seeking release from their dimensionally ambiguous incarceration. The land remembers what human records cannot. Beneath Ravenwood's ruins writhes something neither fully present nor completely banished. Entities of pure consumption suspended in eternal hunger without means of satisfaction. The true horror of the Lancaster legacy lies not in their acts but in the revelation that they themselves were victims of a more ancient and alien hunger. The archives fall silent. Yet the story continues whispering through generations of Millbrook residents feeling a peculiar lightness each time they cross the county line. The land itself has become a palimpsest, each layer of history written upon the previous, never fully erasing what came before but adding dimensions transforming horror into something more complex. During the total solar eclipse of 2017, observers reported a curious phenomenon visible only during totality, a spectral outline of Ravenwood Manor appearing to stand fully restored against the darkened sky, its windows illuminated by amber light casting no reflection. Within those phantom windows, silhouettes moved with elegant measured gestures, raising crystal goblets in silent toast to the darkness. Acoustic engineers from Virginia Commonwealth University, conducting unrelated research on low-frequency propagation, accidentally recorded sound patterns emanating from the ruins. When analyzed through specialized algorithms, they revealed phonemes matching no known human language yet conveying emotional content, causing 3 research assistants to request immediate reassignment. The lead scientist described the sensation as listening to hunger itself given voice. The Blackwell family continues its quiet vigilance. Their altered physiology forms a living testament to Eleanor's sacrifice. Their blood, when viewed under electron microscopy, reveals crystalline lattices storing and processing energies beyond conventional measurement. They are not merely descendants but custodians, their very existence forming part of the barrier containing what Jonathan Lancaster attempted to destroy. Soil samples extracted at increasing distances from the former estate reveal a gradient of molecular abnormality, compounds gradually normalizing with each mile traveled from the epicenter. The Earth remembers what human records cannot fully capture, its very chemistry altered by decades of feeding rituals treating life essence as commodity rather than sacred force. Most profound are the dreams still visiting certain children born within Millbrook's boundaries, not nightmares of consumption but visions of elegantly dressed figures trapped behind glass, their expressions no longer hungry but resigned. These children wake not in terror but with inexplicable tears, feeling empathy they cannot articulate for beings neither fully monstrous nor completely victims. The Lancaster legacy persists not merely as historical curiosity but as living warning about appetites transcending individual lifespans, how patterns of consumption once established create their own momentum outliving any single practitioner. What began as conscious choice became biological necessity and finally embedded itself within the very landscape, a hunger so profound it reshaped reality around itself. As another 27-year cycle approaches completion, Catherine Blackwell's granddaughter places 23 white roses in a perfect circle atop what was once Ravenwood's foundation. The flowers, grown in soil untainted by the estate's influence, represent not memorial but boundary, a living declaration separating what was from what continues. The true horror of Ravenwood lies not in the consumption itself but in its endless echoes, the ripples spreading outward through time, touching lives far removed from the original acts yet still subject to their influence. The hunger never truly ends. It merely transforms, becoming more diffuse but no less present. In the winter twilight of 2030, when the last embers of day surrender to encroaching darkness, a solitary figure stands upon the hilltop overlooking what was once Ravenwood Manor. Dr. Eliza Blackwell, her silver hair illuminated like spun moonlight against gathering shadows, completes the circle her ancestors began. The weight of generations rests upon her slender shoulders as she unfolds an ancient parchment map across the frost-hardened ground. The 27th anniversary approaches once more. In the distance, Millbrook's church bells toll 6 times, their resonance carrying unusual clarity through the December air. Birds fall suddenly silent, as though nature itself holds its breath. From her leather satchel, Eliza withdraws 23 vials of clear liquid, distilled essence of Blackwell blood, freely given by each living descendant, the final key to seal what was temporarily contained. The symmetry requires completion, she whispers to the twilight, her words forming delicate crystalline patterns hovering momentarily before dissolving into gathering darkness. What began in hunger must end in balance. Below, the ruins seem to shift subtly, stones rearranging into ghostly outlines of former grandeur. The air above the foundation shimmers with amber luminescence, not reflecting outward but pulling inward, as though light itself were being consumed. Through this distortion, figures in elegant Victorian attire gaze upward with expressions neither malevolent nor benign but carrying the terrible weight of eternal hunger without satisfaction. Eliza uncorks the first vial, pouring its contents upon the earth in precise geometric alignment with emerging stars. The liquid does not seep into the ground but hovers upon the surface, coalescing into delicate silver filaments pulsing with rhythmic luminosity. Each subsequent offering joins the pattern, forming an intricate web spanning the foundation. Not in vengeance, she continues, her voice gaining strength, but in completion. When the final vial is emptied, the web of silver light contracts suddenly, pulling downward with inexorable force. The spectral outline of Ravenwood shudders, its elegant columns and sweeping verandas dissolving into mist swirling with increasing velocity toward a central point within the foundation. From this vortex rises a sound beyond description, not merely audible but felt through bone and blood and memory itself, as the entities trapped in Jonathan Lancaster's sacrificial disruption find themselves finally, mercifully released from eternal hunger. The light intensifies briefly, blindingly, before collapsing inward upon itself with thunderous silence reverberating through consciousness rather than the ear. Where Ravenwood once stood, where ruins later crumbled, where phantom architecture occasionally manifested, now exists only unadorned earth, neither hallowed nor cursed but finally simply land. Eliza Blackwell stands motionless as her heterochromic eyes gradually return to uniform brown. The silver in her hair darkens to chestnut, the crystalline structures in her blood dissolving into ordinary cellular composition. The weight of generations lifts from her shoulders as the ancient ledger of consumption reaches its final balance. The hunger that wore human faces across centuries, that fed upon essence rather than mere flesh, that transformed an entire lineage into vessels for its insatiable appetite, dissipates not into destruction but into completion. The cycle neither continuing nor broken but simply finally concluded. This has been the Ghastly Journal. Until next time, remember that some stories are best left untold.